Well, the Insolvency Act came in 1986, and that was on the back of the Cook report, and it consolidated a lot of the earlier legislation. And since 1986, there's been 23 sets of amending legislation. So as you can imagine, the whole of the rules is a nightmare to try and read and understand. But they didn't implement all the recommendations of the Court Committee and the Cook report. And also, since 1986, how we work and how business operates has changed. You know, we now use, you know, there were no personal computers in 1986. You know, there was no internet, and how we conduct business and how we manage estates has been revolutionised, and the new legislation is really there to recognise and implement what actually has already happened on the ground, but is not reflected in legislation. So part of that is modernisation of language, streamlining of what we do, and also an attempt to bring everything into you know, the 21st century.
Yeah. Okay, thanks very much. Well, that talks to where we've come from in the sense of the Court Committee leading into the 1986 provisions and then their accompanying rules. How have we got to this reform process in terms of, well, let's perhaps talk about from 2007 onwards in the sense of movements of reform for insolvency rules?
Yeah, in 2007 this process was kicked off, and I think there was quite a lot of basic changes because of the change in the way we work, the whole use of the internet, websites, but also there was a lot of sticking points in 2007, the opt-in, opt-out, which we'll explain a bit more about, you know, later on. But it didn't actually manage to get done because it was such a massive process, and there were such a lot of changes, which were probably changes that were ahead. The changes they wanted would be leading the change as opposed to just recognising what had already happened. Whereas I think now, in 2016, these changes, as I was saying, these changes have already happened because people are using websites and emails routinely, as opposed to before that, you know, there was still a lot of paper post and people still wanted face-to-face meetings, whereas now people are quite happy with remote meetings and Skype and things like that. So that was where I think the current consolidation process is more likely to actually conclude successfully, hopefully in the next few months.
Okay, so that's the 2007 push. In terms of the reform process itself, though, and the characters that were involved, the committees and the process of reform, can you tell us a bit about that in the sense of consultation, how the reform has moved forward, whether or not that's been a process that's led to what we might see as a good solid set of rules that reflect that practice you've been talking about, or if they're perhaps over-engineered?
Yeah, there's been a considerable amount of consultation, and I think that's probably been the problem, that the consultation has probably gone on too long. But then once I think that when they issued the set of rules to the Insolvency Rules Committee in July, other than the feedback they get from the committee, the consultation is now finished. So we were now simply waiting for the final version. So we've seen the published version that went to the Rules Committee, and the next published version we will see will be the final version. So as far as I'm aware, there's going to be no more consultation at this point, other than technical issues raised by the Rules Committee where they say, you know, something is either incorrect or needs to be reworded because there's ambiguity or something else like that.
Yeah. And is the genesis of the new rules based in work that they've done, or is it more about the Insolvency Services Policy Department that have constructed?
Yeah, it's not work they've done. They've seen it cold. So basically, the drive behind this is policy change. So the three purposes are consolidation of the changes and amendments that have been made to date, the 23 we've talked about. Modernising and simplifying the language used, because law has moved on, the way we write law has moved on. So there's been a lot of change in the terminologies and simplification, really, so that the average person can read it and understand what is required from a particular section or rule. And it's also incorporating the changes and the policy changes that came out of the red tape challenge. Basically to try and save money, streamline, make businesses more efficient, including insolvency practitioners and how they administer estates.